What if I told you that everything you believed about the Victorian family was untrue? Are you ready to learn the truth about who really raised the children of the English elite? In the luxurious mansions of Victorian England, there was a paradoxical rule according to which a biological mother could know her child less well than a hired servant. Many aristocratic children saw the face and heard the voice of their nanny more often than the woman who gave them life. This system, based on strict etiquette, social status, and ancient traditions, created a whole world of hidden drama and complex human relationships within the walls of wealthy homes. The fates of entire generations were decided within the walls of children's rooms, where the main characters were not the parents, but their hired helpers. Watch the video to the end to find out how a maid, deprived of her own voice, became the keeper of the most intimate secrets and what the true price of Victorian etiquette was. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of wealthy families. Imagine that you live in a luxurious mansion. You have every conceivable wealth, but you only see your children for an hour a day, and even then, only on a schedule. For the Victorian aristocracy, motherhood was more a matter of dynasty and duty than the daily emotional labor we know today. Immediately after birth, the child was placed under the complete control of a nanny, who became his or her tutor, teacher, and primary attachment figure. This strict protocol freed the mother from routine cares, allowing her to focus on her social obligations, visits, receptions, and managing the household. That is why the nanny, not the mother, spent endless hours in the nursery, comforting, feeding, and playing with the little heirs. She knew all the child's habits, fears, favorite games, and even their secret mischief, which was hidden from their strict parents. While the mother was a distant and majestic figure, seen only during formal parlor hours, the nanny was a constant, warm, and unchanging presence. This system was not only a tribute to fashion, but also a social statement about status. A real lady should not burden herself with everyday, lowly concerns. Luxury, wealth, and free time were inextricably linked to the ability to delegate all parental responsibilities to hired staff. However, this division created a deep emotional chasm that often affected the relationship between parents and children throughout their lives. Many famous figures of that era recalled in their memoirs that it was their nanny, not their mother, who was their first teacher, friend, and even confidant. Despite her low status, this servant had unlimited power over the formation of the personality and worldview of the future nobleman or politician. She was not just a servant, but a key link in the education of the elite. As a result, for the child, the nanny was the embodiment of unconditional love and acceptance, while the parents often represented authority, fear, and the strictest rules of Victorian etiquette. Children who grew up in such a system received a brilliant education in manners, but often did not know how to build close and sincere relationships with their own father and mother. How harmful do you think this system of upbringing was to the emotional development of the child? I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about the child despot? Despite her closeness to the children, the nanny's position was very ambiguous. She could be either a loving second mother or a real child despot within the walls of the nursery. This position seemed gentle and homely, but in reality it required tremendous self-control and hard work. The nanny had to constantly monitor the child's condition, clothing, health, and mood, without allowing herself any weaknesses. Her role became especially important in families where the parents spent a lot of time away from home. Therefore, the nanny was not just an assistant, but a key figure in the child's daily life. The rigorous selection process for this position required not only the ability to care for a child, but also knowledge of etiquette and unwavering authority. In Victorian families, it was considered important for a nanny to be able to maintain order and discipline as confidently as the adult members of the family. Many women learned this profession from a young age by observing experienced nannies at work or undergoing special training. Their responsibilities included not only raising the child, but also communicating properly with the parents so as not to disrupt the established order. The nanny managed not only the child, but also the junior staff of the nursery, including maids and sometimes even the governess. Her authority was almost absolute within her domain, which began with the nursery and ended with the maid's bedroom. She determined how each day of the child's life should proceed and ensured that the routine was followed without interruption. The nanny could decide when the child should eat, sleep, play, and even when he or she was allowed to see his or her parents. Sometimes parents only saw their child for a few minutes a day, trusting the nanny completely. This made her word decisive in many matters of upbringing and health. Parents often relied entirely on her opinion about their child's health and behavior, which gave her enormous influence. If the nanny thought that the child needed more rest, or conversely more walks, her word was taken as professional advice. Many children grew up in conditions where it was the nanny who shaped their habits, character, and attitude towards life. Sometimes she became the main moral mentor and role model. Because of this, the nanny's authority could be almost invisible, but deep and lasting. At the same time, the nanny was a servant and could be dismissed at any moment, and her fate depended entirely on the mood of the lady of the house. The slightest mistake could lead to dismissal, especially if the parents felt that the child's upbringing was suffering. This created constant tension because the nanny lived in fear of losing not only her job, but also her home. She had to remain calm and confident so as not to show her anxiety to the child. This situation required extraordinary emotional restraint. This created constant tension. She had to earn the child's love, strictly follow the rules set by her employers, and sometimes even hide the child's misbehavior from the parents. The nanny often found herself between two worlds, trying to please both, but not always able to do so. She understood that being too lenient could cause dissatisfaction among the parents, and being too strict could ruin her relationship with the child. As a result, she constantly balanced between loyalty to the family and compassion for the child. Many stories from the Victorian era are full of tales of nannies who used their power to establish very strict and sometimes downright cruel rules. Some of them believed that strict discipline was the only way to raise a future adult, and because of this, children spent years in fear. They might forbid children from playing, punish them for the slightest misdemeanor, or use emotional pressure to maintain their authority. Such methods made a child's life cold and formal, but the nanny's authority allowed her to hide her actions from adults. However, there were others who became true guardian angels, protecting children from overly strict parents or illness. Such nannies became a source of warmth and care for children, which was sometimes lacking in wealthy families. They comforted the child when he cried and helped him understand what kindness and support were. Many of these women remained in the memory of their adult pupils as the most important people of their childhood. Their kindness created an atmosphere in which the child felt safe. It was often the nanny who brought the first information about the outside world, telling stories or reading books that were not available in the strictly regulated educational process. She could tell the child about simple things that were far from the life of the aristocracy and show them how ordinary people lived. Such stories broadened their horizons and helped children become more sensitive and attentive. The nanny became their first guide to the world of human experiences. Her stories and songs were often remembered for a lifetime. She was a bridge between the world of luxury in which the child lived and the world of ordinary people to which she herself belonged. Thanks to this, the child could observe not only the official side of life, but also simple human feelings. As part of the servant class, the nanny helped children understand that the world was much more complicated than it seemed to them. This informal, sometimes even folkloric approach to education complemented dry academic learning. It shaped humanity and emotional maturity. The grown-up heir, going to college or entering society, often left the nanny with enormous gratitude. Many young men and women remembered their childhood years through the prism of the nanny's care, rather than through their relationship with their parents. In some families, nannies became almost like relatives and were treated with respect and warmth. Grateful pupils sometimes continued to correspond with their former nannies for many years. Therefore, many wealthy families provided their former nannies with a decent old age and even a pension. In turn, nannies who devoted their lives to other people's children rarely had the opportunity to build a personal life or start their own families. Their working day lasted from early morning until late evening, leaving little energy or time for their own plans. Many nannies spent decades in the same house, watching several generations grow up. They became part of the family, but remained servants, dependent on the decisions of their employers. Such was the life of a woman whose profession demanded complete dedication. What do you think was the most difficult duty of a nanny in a Victorian household? What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries. No, it is not violence. It is a ban on showing the true life of aristocrats. The nursery was not just a bedroom, it was a kind of observation point from which the nanny and maids could see the underside of the life of a wealthy family. While the mansion's formal rooms were a place for the public presentation of the ideal Victorian family, the nursery was a place where masks came off and true emotions were revealed. Nannies, being constantly nearby, unwittingly witnessed all the family dramas, quarrels, financial difficulties, and intimate problems. They saw the drunken lord return home, the lady cry alone, or the spouses quarrel over jealousy or debts. This information, not intended for strangers' ears, stuck in the servants' memories and sometimes became the subject of quiet gossip in the kitchen or in the service corridors. At the same time, nannies were bound by an unspoken vow of silence, as revealing family secrets threatened immediate dismissal and complete loss of reputation. It was the maid who might notice the first signs of alienation between parents, or understand that some tragedy had occurred in the family that no one dared to talk about aloud. Observing the daily life of the aristocracy gave them a unique, albeit limited insight into the real price of wealth and high status. They knew that behind the luxurious dresses and perfect manners often lay pain, loneliness, and unhappiness. The servants saw all the imperfections that were carefully hidden from society. If the master had secret meetings, if the mistress had nervous breakdowns, if there was a scandal in the family over money, the nanny, standing on the border between two worlds, was the first to know about it. This knowledge gave her a certain secret power, although she could never use it. The relationship between mother and nanny was also often a battleground. There was an unspoken rivalry between them for the child's affection, especially if the nanny was truly loving and caring. The mother could be jealous, and the nanny could feel morally superior, knowing that she had given the child more warmth. This constant observation of other people's lives made maids unique chroniclers of the era, whose memoirs and letters, which have survived to this day, are an invaluable source for understanding Victorian society. They saw not the front facade, but the backyards of aristocratic existence. Like this video if you think this unspoken awareness gave servants too much power. Guess what happened next? The relationship between the child of the elite and his nanny was a remarkable example of overcoming the huge social divide that existed in Victorian society. These two worlds were completely different. The child lived in luxurious apartments, surrounded by servants and exquisite things, while the nanny came from more modest circumstances, where simplicity and hard work were the norm. Despite this, within the walls of the nursery, the social divide almost disappeared. Here existed a small universe of its own, where the nanny's authority was unquestionable and where the child could experience a sense of trust and closeness that even his parents could not provide. A child who had been surrounded by the care of a maid since birth belonged to the upper class, while the nanny belonged to the working or lower middle class. This difference in status was enormous and determined all social relations outside the nursery. But within these walls, the child saw a different picture: care, attention, and emotional support that busy parents could rarely provide. The nanny instilled in him a sense of security and his first social skills. She was his guide to the world of human emotions and care, which did not depend on wealth or title. The child, who was to inherit title and wealth in the future, received his first lessons in life from a woman who could never achieve his position. The nanny brought with her to the nursery not only care, but also the language, accent, habits, and worldview of her class. This involuntary exchange of culture and experience had a strong influence on the formation of character. The child learned to observe, understand, and empathize with people whose lives were very different from his own. These lessons often proved to be more important than the formal education that began later at school. This was especially evident in language and manners. Many aristocrats picked up the accent or dialect of their nannies as children, which sometimes shocked their parents and necessitated correction. Parents hired governesses and sent their children to school to correct these habits, but even after the accent was corrected, phrases, expressions, and intonations characteristic of the common people remained in the child's subconscious. These small details shaped their inner view of the world and taught children to be attentive to others. The nanny's influence was profound and sometimes unconscious, but indelible. The nanny was the first example of service and hierarchy that the child had to master in his adult life. He saw how she treated the maids, how she carried out his parents' orders, how she reacted to praise and punishment. This gave him his first lessons in understanding social roles and responsibilities. The nanny showed how the world worked and demonstrated that authority requires responsibility. The child observed this every day, learning to recognize boundaries and understand how human relationships are built. When the child reached a certain age, usually 7 or 8, he was handed over to a governess or sent to boarding school. This moment was a real tragedy for many nannies and children, as it meant a sharp and often permanent end to their close relationship. The nanny, who had cared for the child for many years, returned to her former low status, and the child was immersed in a world of strict etiquette and discipline. The loss of daily communication with the person who understood them best left a deep emotional mark on both sides. Many aristocrats maintained warm relationships with their former nannies throughout their lives. They wrote them letters, visited them in their old age, gave them gifts, and provided financial support. For many, this was an expression of gratitude for years of care and upbringing. The emotional bond formed in early years remained strong despite social differences and years of separation. A former nanny often became a symbol of reliability and trust for an adult. However, despite all the love, the nanny always remained an employee who could be replaced or fired at any moment. Even if she was beloved and irreplaceable, no one could guarantee her a permanent place in the family. This fact was a constant reminder of the social distance that could not be completely overcome. The child understood that the nanny's love and care had its limits, and the nanny realized that her position depended on the whims of her employers. Why, despite the obvious emotional connection, could Victorian parents still not completely do without the nanny's help? The answer lies in the need for a combination of care, experience, and discipline that they could not provide themselves. Parents relied on the nanny as a professional who understood both children and the rules of their society. Without her, organizing the child's life and maintaining the usual order would have been almost impossible. This was the uniqueness of the nanny's role in the Victorian home. The nursery in a Victorian mansion was a separate world with its own strict hierarchy, where the nanny was at the top of the service pyramid. This world was isolated from the formal rooms and the kitchen, but was closely connected to them by invisible threads of subordination. The head of this space was the senior nanny, or nanny, who was fully responsible for the health, safety, and upbringing of the children. Under her command were the junior nannies and maids, who did the dirtiest work: laundry, cleaning, cooking special meals for the children, and helping them get dressed. Relationships between these servants were often tense, as each sought to prove her usefulness and earn the favor of the senior nanny. After all, their promotion depended on her recommendation. The senior nanny reported directly to the lady of the house, and sometimes to the lord. This distinguished her from other servants, who reported to the housekeeper or butler. This direct connection gave her a special status and allowed her to bypass the general hierarchy of domestic servants, emphasizing the importance of her role. At the same time, the nanny had to clearly distinguish her duties from those of the governess. While the nanny was responsible for physical and moral education at an early age, the governess was responsible for academic education and teaching manners. Conflicts often arose between them over parenting methods, which sometimes required the intervention of the mistress herself. The nursery was also a place of strict etiquette, which the nanny had to uphold. Even in the play area, children had to behave in accordance with their high status, learn to speak properly, and observe good manners. The nanny was the first to punish disobedience, preparing the child for the strict world of adults. The luxury of the nursery often contrasted with the poverty from which the nanny herself came. She lived in the same room as the children, slept on a small bed in the corner, and devoted her entire life to other people's heirs. Her personal space was minimal, and her free time was almost non-existent. A nanny's success was measured not only by the child's obedience, but also by how well they looked and how confidently they behaved in society. If the child was healthy and polite, it was thanks to the nanny. If they were sick or ill-mannered, the blame fell on her. It was a heavy responsibility for someone else's flesh and blood. What if I showed you a time machine? It would take us to the nursery, where children listen to adults' conversations, and where even their parents' whispers can reveal a lot about family affairs. The financial problems and secrets of the Victorian aristocracy often penetrated the walls of the nursery, albeit in a distorted form. The nanny, being close to the children, could hear snippets of conversations, calls from creditors, or muffled arguments between parents about debts, unfavorable deals, and future obligations. This information, though incomplete, gave her an idea of the real state of affairs in the family, which was very different from the outward glamour and luxury displayed to guests and neighbors. She could see that her mother had suddenly stopped buying expensive dresses or jewelry, or that her father had begun to frown more often, leave at night, or stay late in his office. These indirect signs indicated that the family's financial well-being was under threat and that their accustomed lifestyle might change. Even as young children, they sensed the tension and anxiety, sometimes asking the nanny why their parents were sad. She became a mediator between the adults and the children, trying to explain what was happening in understandable terms without revealing the whole truth. Sometimes financial difficulties directly affected the children's lives. Younger maids could be dismissed, food expenses reduced, holidays canceled, or even the purchase of new toys and school supplies postponed. In such cases, the nanny often acted as a buffer, protecting the children from sudden changes and trying to maintain a sense of stability. Her task was to make the children feel protected and not lose trust in their parents. She learned to find a delicate balance between truth and care in order to maintain the child's psychological comfort. At the same time, the nanny herself was part of the family's financial structure, receiving her salary and having her own personal expenses. Any delays in payment or salary cuts directly affected her life, sometimes forcing her to look for a higher-paying job or work part-time for other employers. But many nannies remained in their positions because of their deep attachment to the children, preferring financial hardship to parting with them. Their loyalty and emotional attachment often became more important than material well-being. The nanny could also witness discussions about inheritance and wills, which were key moments in the lives of the aristocracy. Conversations about who would inherit real estate, family jewels or cash funds, and quarrels between relatives often took place within earshot of the nursery. This gave her an insight into the internal struggle for wealth and influence that was important to the whole family. All this information accumulated gradually, giving the nanny a comprehensive understanding of the family structure and political relations within the household. She also kept track of the child's expenses, kept records, and reported to the housekeeper or mistress of the house. This meant that she knew how much was spent on the child's clothing, food, textbooks, toys, and music lessons. She understood which purchases were necessary and which could be postponed or reduced without disrupting the usual way of life. The nanny knew how to control small expenses and found ways to save money in order to maintain order and comfort for the children. All these responsibilities made her not just a caregiver, but also a kind of financial observer. She knew when the household was prospering and when hard times were coming. Her information could help parents make decisions or play it safe when necessary. The nanny often became a secret advisor, albeit without official status, and her observations were important to the whole family. She saw how financial difficulties affected the mood of adults, discipline, and even the education of children. Children in this environment gradually learned to see the consequences of adults' decisions and understood that money plays an important role in their lives. By carefully explaining situations, the nanny helped the child develop an understanding of responsibility and limitations. She was able to show them how to manage resources, value things, and take care of their space. In this sense, financial education began long before formal education and became part of their daily experience. The impact of financial difficulties on a child's upbringing and education was tangible and direct. When it was necessary to economize, children could be deprived of frequent entertainment, travel, or new books. Lessons and classes could also be cut back if parents could not afford to hire additional teachers. In such cases, the nanny tried to compensate for the shortfall by telling stories, reading books, playing games, and developing the child's imagination. She acted as an emotional and educational buffer. The nanny could observe hidden signs of crisis, such as a decline in purchasing activity, changes in parental behavior, or a reduction in spending on small pleasures. These signs allowed her to prepare children for change in advance. She explained to the children that the changes were not their fault and tried to maintain their psychological comfort. In doing so, she demonstrated not only care, but also strategic thinking. In fact, the nanny acted as a secret auditor of the family budget. She saw which expenses were essential and which could be postponed. She knew when the parents were hiding real difficulties and was able to maintain the illusion of stability for the children. This gave her unique power and responsibility in the home. Her observations were important for maintaining order, stability, and psychological security for the children. Thus, the role of a nanny went far beyond simply caring for a child. She was a mediator between the adult world and the world of childhood, as well as an observer of the family's financial situation. Through her, children learned not only about love and care, but also about the need for responsibility and caution. The nanny did invisible work that shaped the child's inner stability and perception of the world. She could also give advice to parents, unofficially influencing decisions about spending and order in the home. Thanks to this, her role took on a diplomatic and strategic tone. She balanced the interests of children and adults, trying to maintain harmony. The nanny observed the home through the eyes of a child and at the same time through the eyes of a servant, which made her perspective unique and irreplaceable. Overall, the nanny was a crucial link that allowed children to feel secure, even when the family was experiencing financial difficulties. She was able to maintain a daily routine, organize learning and leisure activities, creating a sense of continuity and stability. Thanks to her efforts, the children grew up understanding that the world is not always perfect, but that it is possible to cope with difficulties and maintain emotional balance. How could the financial difficulties of the aristocracy affect a child's upbringing and education? The answer lies in the fact that every change in the budget had an impact on the child's routine, studies, leisure activities, and emotional state. The nanny was the person who mitigated these consequences, explained, supported, and helped the children understand what was happening. Her role was invaluable in maintaining stability and harmony despite the family's external difficulties. Understanding Victorian sleep culture and its regulations was one of the nanny's key responsibilities. At that time, there were many superstitions and strict rules regarding children's sleep, and the nanny had to strictly adhere to them. It was believed that a strict routine, early bedtimes, and absolute silence in the nursery were the keys to a child's health and good character. Nannies ensured that children went to bed at a strictly defined time, often very early, regardless of their wishes. Sleep was not just rest, but a disciplinary tool that allowed them to control the child's behavior. Long measured sleep was considered a sign of well-being and good upbringing. To lull children to sleep, nannies often used folk lullabies and fairy tales, practice, which seems dangerous today, was then considered good health care. The nanny was also responsible for nighttime rituals. Bedtime prayers, evening Bible readings, or a short story were part of her duties. These rituals shaped the child's first religious and moral ideas. Sometimes nannies used special sedatives that were popular in the Victorian era. Although today they are considered dangerous, she had to make sure that the child slept soundly and did not disturb the parents. In the end, the nanny was the guardian of Victorian nighttime order. She ensured not only physical sleep, but also the child's emotional peace, which was especially important in the context of strict home rules. The education of a Victorian child was strictly regulated, with a clear schedule of lessons, formal classes, and constant supervision by the governess. But the nanny brought an informal, secret element to this process, which complemented academic knowledge. She created a bridge between a formal education and practical life, adding what textbooks could not provide. These lessons, invisible to parents but important for everyday life, shaped the child's ability to cope with real life. The nanny made learning lively, humane, and practical at the same time. She was a source of non-academic knowledge, which often proved to be more practical and useful than strict lessons in mathematics or grammar. This knowledge helped the child navigate everyday life, understand simple patterns of life, and prepared him for independence. The nanny explained things that were not formally taught in school, such as how to take care of oneself and one's belongings, how to be attentive and observant. This was especially important for aristocratic children who grew up in luxury and isolation. The nanny taught the children practical skills that were not included in the curriculum: tying shoelaces, mending clothes, taking good care of shoes, and keeping personal belongings clean and tidy. She showed them how to take care of their appearance, preparing the child for their future role in society, where every detail mattered. These lessons were invaluable because aristocratic children were often completely detached from real life and did not understand how the world outside their mansion worked. The nanny made their first steps toward independence safe and understandable. She told the children about her life before working in the mansion, about her class, and about the habits, traditions, and customs of ordinary people. These stories were full of details that gave the child an understanding of how other people lived and the difficulties faced by families outside the elite. Often, the nanny's stories were funny, dramatic, or instructive, showing that life is multifaceted. Thanks to these stories, the children learned to appreciate their position and at the same time understand and respect the experiences of others. It was a kind of informal sociology course. The nanny was also the main storyteller and guide to the world of literature and folklore. She read aloud books, stories, legends, told fairy tales, and sang songs, instilling a love for the native language, culture, and oral traditions. These informal lessons often remain the most vivid memories of childhood because they were emotionally rich and personal. Children learned to listen, understand, and express their thoughts through stories and songs, developing their imagination and sense of language. She was the first teacher of morality and ethics in the simplest, most human sense. The nanny taught the children compassion, kindness, honesty, and respect for other people, including the servants. These lessons were not given through dry instruction, but through example and everyday situations. The children observed how the nanny treated others and learned to understand the value of kindness and fairness. Often, such lessons proved to be more effective than the formal instructions of parents because they were related to real situations. She also taught the children how to treat the staff, showing respect and discipline by her own example. The child had to learn to treat the servants politely while maintaining distance and respect for the social hierarchy. The nanny explained the subtleties of communication, the limits of what was permissible, and the need for correctness. This experience helped the child understand how relationships are built in society and how to behave with different people. She was a living example of complex social dynamics. The nanny taught the child practical social skills through everyday situations, how to ask for help properly, how to express requests delicately, and how to recognize other people's moods. Such lessons shaped emotional intelligence and the ability to navigate human relationships. The child learned to observe, draw conclusions, and act according to the circumstances, which later became useful in adult life. The nanny's informal education complemented the strict rules of school and governesses, making the upbringing more complete. She could become a guide to the world of ethics through small, everyday tasks, reminding the child of the importance of honesty, responsibility, and neatness. For example, handling books with care or helping younger servants turned into practical lessons in moral behavior. These everyday activities taught children to appreciate the work of others and to see that respect and kindness are important in any relationship. Such experiences shaped internal guidelines and moral principles that remained with the child for life. Through play, stories, and observing those around them, nannies made learning lively and practical. They knew how to turn every day into a lesson where children learned and understood, while also feeling joy and interest. Even simple household activities became a way of learning about the world. This approach developed attention, observation, and curiosity, making the child more flexible and adaptable to life. A nanny's life did not end when the child grew up, but her future fate depended greatly on how much she was loved and respected in the family. Often, after the child reached adulthood, the nanny remained in the house but moved to another position, such as becoming a maid, housekeeper, or assistant governess. Some nannies, especially if they had raised several children in the same family, became a kind of honorary member of the household. They were given a separate room, allowed to visit their now adult charges, and invited to family celebrations. This was an unspoken recognition of their merits. However, many nannies, especially if they were dismissed or left the house of their own accord, returned to a difficult life. They had to look for new jobs, often with lower salaries and worse conditions. Their reputation, built on the recommendations of previous employers, was their only protection. The happiest fate awaited those nannies whose former pupils provided for them in their old age. This could be monthly payments, the purchase of a small house, or payment for medical services. Such gestures were not only a sign of gratitude, but also a tribute of respect. Some nannies with experience and good references opened their own schools for girls or became private governesses in less wealthy but respected families. Their careers continued, but now in a more independent status. In rare cases, a nanny who was particularly devoted to the family and had a strong character could become a close confidant of the lady of the house, an advisor on matters of upbringing and family affairs. This gave her a special, informal influence on the family's affairs. However, many nannies ended their lives in poverty and loneliness. Having devoted themselves entirely to other people's children, they did not have time to start their own families. Their only memories were photographs and letters from their grown-up charges. The influence of Victorian nannies and governesses who raised the children of the elite lives on in modern culture and literature. The image of the strict but fair servant has become an archetype in English and world culture, reflecting the complex social and emotional phenomena of the era. Classic works such as Jane Eyre and Mary Poppins have immortalized these figures, portraying them as powerful educators capable of changing not only the child, but the entire family. They are presented not as mere servants, but as moral and ethical guides. The influence of nannies can also be seen in modern ideas about upbringing, a strict regime, an emphasis on discipline, and the importance of early learning are all echoes of Victorian methods that were implemented by servants. Psychologists and historians are still studying the phenomenon of the emotional bond between a child and a nanny, noting how it influenced the formation of character and the ability to build relationships in adult life. They recognize that the nanny was a key figure in the emotional development of many aristocrats. The legacy of nannies is also reflected in the preservation of traditions and etiquette. They were the first to instill in future lords and ladies the manners that allowed them to feel confident in high society. They were the guardians of the cultural code. In modern research, the everyday life of a child's room, its decor, and daily routine have become an important source for understanding everyday life in the Victorian era. Historians use this information to recreate an accurate picture of that time. As a result, the nanny became a symbol not only of service, but also of an unspoken power that could influence high society. Her story is one of how a person of low birth can have a huge, albeit temporary, influence on the fate of the powerful. We have taken a detailed look at the complex and paradoxical world in which Victorian children and their hired educators lived. The nanny was more than a servant. She was a secret chronicler, an emotional anchor, and the first teacher for the children of the elite. Her presence in a child's life was more constant and significant than that of the child's own mother, creating a unique and often dramatic picture of family relationships. This paradox of motherhood and servitude is key to understanding Victorian society, where etiquette and status were often placed above personal feelings. The history of nannies is a story of unspoken power, devotion, and complex social games played behind the closed doors of luxurious mansions. What part of the life of Victorian servants did you find most difficult and unfair? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into historical mysteries.